Hey everyone, this is Charlie and you're watching The Burrow. So I recently took a couple weeks off from YouTube. A couple of those were purposeful. Another one and a half was forced for various reasons. But what I was able to discover during this time was sort of how to boost my own creativity. And maybe some of the things I'm going to talk with you about today are very, very obvious, but some of them I never thought about before. And if I never thought about them before, maybe there are some of you out there who haven't thought about them either. So the first thing that I found over my sort of 3 to 5 week break, depending on the channel from YouTube, was that if I let myself stop being so defined by what I thought a work needed to be or should be, it came out to be something a lot more interesting, a lot more creative, and a lot more fulfilling creatively. And so I'm calling this kind of like the idea of the infinite draft, right? Air quotes, air quotes. And it kind of sounds pretentious to give it a label like that. But let me explain. I've been working on this nonfiction piece for such a long time, and it's a piece that's constantly given me trouble. So much so that I've talked about it on the channel before, actually, where I've had to rewrite it, and it just didn't seem right. And what it came to be, I found out, was that I was trying to sort of make the story fit a mold in every parts of the writing process, instead of just letting it be its own thing, right? I was trying to make it fit this idea of what I thought the story should be, instead of letting the story sort of tell itself. So what I've started doing when I'm writing is sort of just letting myself sit down in my drafts and just let whatever comes to mind out onto the page. Now this means necessarily that when I go back to edit, there's probably going to be a lot more that I have to chop out, but I find that there are some interesting little tidbits or interesting little bits of flair and flavor that I can add to the narrative that don't necessarily speak directly to the story at hand, to the narrative at hand, but they add a little bit of flavor, they add a little bit of scenery, they add a little bit of background that makes for a much better story overall. So that's why I'm calling it infinite, is that I can put anything I want down on the page during my first couple drafts and then sort of pull it back afterwards. I'm not sure if some of you guys know to do that already, or if I'm just an idiot, which is a very good possibility, but it's something that I found to be really, really helpful these past couple weeks when I've just been sort of focusing on writing and some other things. The second thing is the idea of treating creativity as one collective muscle, right? It should go without saying, I'm pretty sure I've drawn for some reason on this channel before. I think it was for business cards, although maybe that was on my main channel, but anyway. But there is this feeling among a lot of artists, I think, in many disciplines, that if they're not focused on their own main discipline, then maybe they aren't really doing much. But what I found is that by treating creativity as like the creative muscle, right? You sort of strengthen yourself in different areas. So obviously normally I'm focused on writing, but I found that really what my drive is a lot of the time, as much as I love writing, isn't necessarily just to write. My sort of motivation is I want to create something, right? Like I wake up and in between the time that I wake up and I go to sleep, there's just so much time where I'm just thinking, oh man, I feel the need to create something, right? And that's not always something that translates to the page. It's not always an interesting story, right? So maybe it's making a video, or it's going to take a couple pictures, or it's drawing a stupid sketch, or maybe it is writing and it's writing like in a completely different format than I ever really write, and it's never going to see the light of day, but it's just sort of stretching that muscle. And what I found is that maybe this is something we touched on, and I hope we touched on during our live stream many moons ago about sort of creative cross-training. But by sort of letting myself sort of move between these disciplines, at least in like a very limited way, it tends to inform my writing, right? If I can focus every now and then, maybe on photography, even if it's only for an hour a week or something, and I start to think about how the light is hitting a certain area, or how the colors look, or the framing, maybe I become a little bit better at sort of setting those scenes in my writing too, and it certainly seems to be the case. So, right now, the last point I want to talk about is a little bit more discipline specific, I guess, and that's about how to beat down writer's block. Though I think you can have creator's block. I've certainly had like video maker's block, where I'm just like, oh, I can think of nothing to make a video about. And I think Emily made the point before that oftentimes block comes from fear, right? Comes from fear that what you're going to write isn't going to be interesting, it's not going to live up to what you see in your head, and what have you. And I forget where I heard it. It may have been like the Nerdist Writers podcast or anyway, some kind of creative podcast. But the idea was that if you find yourself stuck, right, and you can't write something, sit down and write about your inability to write something, right? And what you'll find a lot of the time is like why you aren't sitting down and writing. Maybe you're just feeling lazy that day, and that will come out in this sort of writing experiment where you're like, blah blah blah, I just feel like I've been doing too much lately, and I've been running every day and studying Japanese every day, and I don't have time for anything else. So maybe it's about time management, it's about being lazy, or maybe it is like a bigger fear. Like there is a character in my novel, or the novel in general, I was having a hard time finishing because the way it ended reminded me of something bad that happened when I was a kid, and I didn't really want to write about it and put it out there. And that was something I got to through one of these writing experiments. So I think, again, whether you're a writer or whether you're an artist or you're a videographer, whatever the case may be, if you find yourself in a position where you're unwilling to make yourself sit down and be creative, something that I think you can never let go of because that's just what you have to do a lot of the time, then sit down and write about why. And the answer might surprise you. But even if it does, I think you'll find you'll be much more willing to get back into your work. So thanks always for watching, guys. I'm really glad to be back here on The Burrow. I'm going to be back on my main channel here this week as well. It's nice to be back. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about my tips for being more creative. What are some tips that you would give other creatives, both in your life and just some of these awesome strangers you can meet here on the internet? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks always for watching. Please be sure to check out all of our other videos here in The Burrow, and go write something awesome.
So for this year, I got to design the back cover for our class book. So I think I've talked about it before, it kind of serves as like a portfolio at the end of the year, but everyone gets to put in a certain amount of pages of their best work, and